Sage 100 ERP 2015 Intelligence Reporting gives you greater control over your financial reporting. If you are familiar with Microsoft Excel, then the new Task Pane in the Financial Report Designer provides the tools you need to build comprehensive layouts using drag and drop and standard Excel functionality. In this video, we're going to take you through the process of designing a new layout using the Task Pane. We'll create a balance sheet for the first quarter. It will show account detail grouped by account category and will be based on the ABC demo company that is shipped with Sage 100 ERP. Let's take a look at the end result. You can see the different parts that make up the balance sheet. At the top of the worksheet are the high-level filters, which allow you to specify the company and fiscal year. On the left, you'll see the accounts and their descriptions. They have been grouped by account category and, as this is a balance sheet, include assets, liabilities, and equity. The columns of the report are indicated by the column labels above the report data. Our layout will include balances for periods 1, 2, and 3. Lastly, you can see your report data. If we had to define a process to create a layout like this, it would be to first add your report headings. Then next you would add a list to the layout and arrange it according to the type of layout and account detail you would like to see. The next step would be to add your column headings, and then lastly, add and configure your financial formulas, including your subtotals. Let's now work through this process to create the layout. To use the Task Pane, you have to run the Financial Report Designer in the Report Manager. In a previous video in this series, we showed you how to create an income statement for the first quarter. I'm going to run out this report because, as you'll see later, we'll use the information from the income statement as the retained earnings for the current year in our balance sheet. We'll need this for the balance sheet to balance. Once the report is opened in Excel, we can begin creating our layout. We'll need an empty sheet to do this, so add a new sheet to the workbook and rename it to Balance Sheet Q1. The first thing to do is add our report headings. So at the top of the sheet in column B, add the headings Company and Fiscal Year. We're adding the headings to column B because, as you'll see, our account codes will end up in column A. This will give you the option to hide column A if you prefer not to see your account codes. We need to include the parameters for company and fiscal year, so enter ABC and 2020 in their respective cells in the report headings. If you don't already know, the Sage Intelligence formulas that will be used to return your financial data accept these parameters as arguments, and so filter your data accordingly. Once your layout is complete, you can update these values to refer to your specific company data. The next step is to add a list to the layout and edit it. Select the Lists tab in the Task Pane and have a look at the lists that are available. If you're ever unsure of what information a list contains, you can quickly check this by opening a spare sheet and dragging the list into the sheet. You can then delete the sheet whenever you're finished with it. We're interested in showing accounts, including their descriptions, grouped by account category. These details can be found in the accounts list, so drag the list to column A in the sheet and below the report headings. Leave a few lines between the report headings and the list to give space for the column headings. We can always delete any extra rows later. Lastly, delete the row with the field names from the list. We can now edit the list. Let's group the rows in each category and add some row labels to identify each group. To do this, add some empty rows in between the assets, liabilities, and equity accounts, and then enter the account category above each group in column B to identify the group. In a balance sheet, you need to take into account retained earnings for the current year. You could do this by summarizing the income statement accounts that are in our list, in other words, creating a mini income statement in the balance sheet. But since we already did the necessary work when creating our income statement, we'll reference those values instead. Since we now don't need any of the income statement accounts, you can delete all the rows below equity in the list. Retained earnings for the current year is part of equity, so to include it, enter retained earnings current year as a description below the retained earnings account. We'll also need a row for total equity. You can type in total equity as a description below the retained earnings line we just entered. Lastly, we'll need a row to calculate total liabilities plus equity. So add this 2 rows below total equity. We have now finished adding all the rows needed for the balance sheet. The next step in our process is to add our column headings. Apart from the account number and account description information in our list, the other columns aren't necessary, so these can be deleted as well. Be sure just to delete the data and not the Excel columns, as this may delete some of the information in your column headings. Now, above your row labels and to the right of the description column, enter the column headings of Closing Balance 01, Closing Balance 02, and Closing Balance 03 in separate columns. Also, enter the values 1, 2, and 3 above each column heading respectively. We will use these values as the reference values for our periods when we add our formulas to the layout. This is the next step in our process. To determine the balances for each period, we will use the closing balance formula and reference the current period in our column headings. But before we add our formula, we need to do one thing. Because of the cell formatting used by our list, when we add and set up our formula, it won't return a value. To fix this, select the entire accounts area under the column headings, then right-click in the area and select Format Cells. The Format Cells dialog will open. Under Category in the Number tab, select Custom, and then the option shown on the screen. We're now ready to add our formulas. Go ahead and select the Formulas tab and start by dragging Closing Balance into the cell of the first account row in the Closing Balance 01 column. You need to edit the formula to reference the correct fields in the layout, so with the formula selected, click on the Function button to the left of the formula bar. The Function Arguments window will open. For the GL link field, select the account number in the current row and press F4 3 times to absolute reference the column. For the year, select the year value in the report headings and press F4 once to absolute reference the cell. Next, for period, select the period value above the column heading and press F4 twice to absolute reference the row. Then lastly, for company, select the company code in the report headings and press F4 once to absolute reference the cell. Then click OK to close the Function Arguments window. The formula will now return the closing balance for the first asset account for the first period. Now, all you need to do is copy the formula down and across to the rest of the accounts and columns in the Assets group. Now do the same for liabilities and equity. Remember, in Sage 100, credit amounts are stored as negative values and debit amounts are stored as positive values, so you'll need to switch the sign in the formulas that you add. For this, all you need to do is add a minus sign after the equals in the first formula that you add. When you copy the formula down and across, the minus sign will be copied as well. We still need to add subtotals to the layout. You can add these above or below your account groups, but we're going to add them above in the same row as the account category title. So in the row that has the title Assets and in the Closing Balance 01 column, enter the formula equals subtotal, open brackets, 9, semicolon, then select all the asset values in the column, then close the brackets and press Enter. copy the formula across to the columns for closing balance 02 and closing balance 03. It's easy, right? You can then copy all three formulae down to the title row for liabilities and then for equity. But remember to update your cell references for each one to include the correct accounts. Next, we need to reference the values in our income statement for retained earnings for the current year. In the closing balance 01 column of the retained earnings current year row, type equals and then select the income statement sheet. Select the net income value for the first period and press enter. Remember that the values for net income in the income statement are actuals for each period, so to return the balance amounts for periods 02 and 03 in our balance sheet, we'll need to add the accumulated amounts for period 02 and 03 in the income statement respectively. So in the closing balance 02 column of the retained earnings current year row, type equals and then select the income statement. Select the net income value for the second period and then press the plus key. Now go back to the balance sheet and select the retained earnings current year value that is in the closing balance 01 column. Then press enter. The value that is returned will be the sum of net income for period 1 and period 2. In the closing balance 03 column of the retained earnings current year row, type equals and then select the income statement. Now this time, select the net income value for the third period and then press the plus key. Go back to the balance sheet and select the retained earnings current year value that is in the closing balance 02 column. Then press enter. The value that is returned will now be the sum of net income for period 1, 2, and 3. One thing to remember when you view your balance sheet is that in order for these calculations to return the correct amounts, the fiscal year in your income statement needs to be the same as the fiscal year in your balance sheet. Also, one benefit of adding your calculations in this way is that it makes it easy to expand your columns if you want to add more periods. We're almost there. We just need to add subtotals for our total equity and total liabilities in equity rows. In the total equity row, use a sum formula to add the equity subtotals to the retained earnings current year values. Lastly, enter formulas in the total liabilities and equity row that will add the liabilities subtotals to the total equity values. You should now see your liabilities and equity balance with your assets. In this video, we walk through the process of designing a layout using the Task Pane and have shown you how to add your report headings, use lists, add column headings, and enter both Sage Intelligence and Excel formulas. We also reference the information in our income statement to show retained earnings for the current year. To finish off your layout, you can use Excel formatting and functionality to make it look the way you want. Some ideas include hiding your account code column, changing the format of your column headings and title rows, and grouping your accounts. An example of this can be seen on screen. Remember that in order to save your layout, you'll need to link it back to your report in the Report Manager. To view other videos in this series, go to youtube.com/Sage Intelligence. Also, connect with us at sageintelligence.com, sageintelligencecommunity.com, or view our online courses at sageintelligenceacademy.com. And we love your feedback, so if you found this video useful, please like it and share it on your social media channels.